Archaeologists in the American Southwest once dug up a smoking pipe buried next to its owner. The site was about 3,000 years old, and for a long time, that was the answer. That was as far back as humans and tobacco went. Impressive. Ancient. Case closed. Except it wasn't even close. Because then researchers found nicotine residue inside a flask in Alabama, dating back to around 3000 BCE. Older. And then, in 2021, a study in Nature Human Behavior pushed the whole thing off a cliff. Tobacco evidence in what's now Utah, going back roughly 12,000 years. 12,000 years. Let that sink in. That's before farming, before pottery, before the wheel, before writing, before almost everything we call the start of civilization. Humans were already reaching for this plant. So the real answer to, when did we start smoking, isn't a few thousand years ago. It's deep, deep in the Stone Age. And that one fact breaks almost everything we assumed about it. The obvious question is, how is that even possible? To answer it, you have to start with the brain. When nicotine reaches your brain, it locks onto specific receptors and triggers a flood of dopamine in your reward pathways. And here's the strange part. Depending on the dose, it can either wake you up or calm you down. Same substance, opposite effects. On top of that, small amounts sharpen your focus, speed up your reaction time, and boost your memory. Now picture that in a Stone Age body. Someone tracking an animal for miles, reading tiny signals in the landscape, making split-second decisions to survive. Sharper focus and faster reactions aren't a luxury there. They're the difference between eating and starving. Which is why some researchers think the first pull toward nicotine wasn't about pleasure at all. It was about performance. The plant made you sharper, and that made it worth choking down a harsh, throat-burning smoke. Worth doing on purpose, over and over. But that raises an even bigger mystery. How did anyone discover this in the first place? Because here's the thing nobody tells you. The tobacco plant does not make nicotine for us. It makes it as a pesticide, a poison to kill the insects trying to eat it. Nothing about a tobacco leaf says, burn me, breathe me in, you'll feel amazing. So how did an ancient human, with no chemistry, no lab, no instructions, ever find that out? The most likely answer is the oldest technology we have. Fire. Early humans lived around cooking fires, burning whatever plants were nearby every single day. If tobacco grew close to camp and drifted into the flames, people would have breathed that smoke without meaning to. And they'd have felt something. A little lift. A little focus. A little calm. That accidental lungful, thousands of years before anyone carved a pipe, is almost certainly where the entire human story of smoking begins. Not with a decision, with an accident next to a fire. And that accident fits a pattern much bigger than tobacco. All across the ancient world, on separate continents, humans were reaching for mind-altering plants and folding them into their rituals. This collision between the human brain and psychoactive plants is not a modern habit. It's one of the oldest things our species does. Tobacco was simply the version that grew in the Americas, waiting. And once humans there embraced it, they didn't treat it lightly. Indigenous cultures across North, Central, and South America built entire relationships with tobacco over thousands of years. To many, it wasn't a snack or a buzz. It was sacred, too powerful for everyday use, reserved for ceremony, for healing, for speaking to the spirit world. The Maya even had a god tied to it, and left us artwork of figures smoking. That's why the peace pipe became one of the few symbols recognized across dozens of totally different tribes. By the time outsiders ever saw it, tobacco had been woven into human meaning for so long that no one remembered a beginning. It was just always there. And then, in the late 1400s, that plant met the rest of the world, and it moved. With terrifying speed. Within a few years of Columbus, it reached Spain. Within decades, France and Portugal. Within about a century, it had circled the entire planet. No ads, no internet, just a plant that fuels its own demand because it's addictive. In a single lifetime, a habit that took 12,000 years to build quietly, exploded across every continent on Earth. But that global takeover is really a different story. The story of this video, the question we actually came here to answer, was settled long before any of it. Down in the deep prehistoric past. Which brings us right back to that 12,000-year-old evidence in Utah and the uncomfortable truth underneath it. Those nicotine receptors in your brain, they didn't evolve for tobacco. They evolved for something else entirely, long before this plant existed. But they're there. They're real. And they respond to nicotine in a way humans find useful and rewarding, in every culture, in every century, whether it's a hunter-gatherer beside a fire or someone in a car today. That's the deeper answer. Humans didn't start smoking because of a plant, or a habit, or a fashion. We started because a molecule fit a lock inside our own heads a little too perfectly. Given enough time, given fire, given tobacco growing anywhere nearby, this was always going to happen to us. So, when did humans start smoking? Earlier than almost anyone believed. Deep enough in prehistory to beat farming by thousands of years. From a hunter-gatherer near a fire 12,000 years ago to a person quitting today, it's the same brain, the same molecule, the same pull. One of the oldest relationships our species has ever had, and it's nowhere near over. If the real history of the things we take for granted fascinates you as much as it does me, subscribe. Because the truth is almost always older and stranger than the story we were told.